Daniel was no stranger to loneliness, though he rarely allowed himself to dwell on it. His life revolved around his 8-year-old daughter Emily, whose innocent laughter filled the small house with a warmth that often masked the silence of his single nights. He had grown used to the steady rhythm of work, school runs, late-night story readings, and quiet evenings filled with the hum of household chores. Ever since his wife had left years ago, Daniel had learned to wear strength as armor, a shield that protected Emily from the heartbreak of abandonment and himself from the ache of unmet longing. That night was no different. Emily had just been tucked into bed, her stuffed rabbit nestled under her chin, her breathing slowing into the rhythm of sleep. Daniel sat at the kitchen table with a half-finished cup of coffee, staring at the unopened bills stacked neatly by his elbow. The sound of a sudden knock on the door startled him. It wasn't just the knock, it was the urgency, sharp and loud, rattling the wood against its frame. His brow furrowed as he stood, unease creeping over him. No one visited this late. He pulled the door open, and the sight that met him froze his breath. A young woman stood there, her clothes torn and dirt-stained, her face pale under the dim glow of the porch light. Her wide eyes brimmed with terror, and before he could even form a word, she stumbled forward. Daniel's arms instinctively caught her as her frail body crumpled against his chest. She pressed her face into him, her voice a trembling whisper that sent a chill down his spine, "Help me." In that moment, time seemed to still. He didn't know who she was or why she had come to his doorstep, but something deep in him, an instinct born of both fatherhood and a man's natural need to protect, told him one thing. This woman wasn't safe, and neither would she be unless he made her. Holding her trembling body, Daniel closed the door behind them and realized his world had just changed. He carried her to the couch, laying her down as gently as if she were made of glass. The woman's breath came in short, uneven gasps, and her trembling fingers clutched at his shirt as if afraid he would disappear if she let go. Emily's small voice piped from her bedroom doorway, soft but curious. "Daddy, who is she?" Daniel turned, quickly pasting on a calm smile, though inside his heart thundered. "Just someone who needs our help, sweetheart. Go back to bed, okay?" Reluctantly, Emily retreated, though her eyes lingered with childlike wonder. Daniel fetched a blanket, draping it over the stranger, then filled a glass of water. She sat up enough to sip, her gaze flicking nervously toward the windows as though she feared someone might burst through at any moment. "My name is Sophie," she whispered, her voice fragile yet carrying weight. "They're after me." Daniel swallowed hard. He wanted to ask who, but he could see the exhaustion pulling at her eyelids. There would be time for questions later. Right now, she needed safety. "You're safe here," he assured her firmly. For a long while, Sophie simply stared at him, as though testing the truth of his words. Slowly, her body seemed to loosen, her eyelids lowering. Daniel sat close, keeping watch, his mind racing with questions he couldn't yet answer. Who was after her? Why had she chosen his house? And what danger had she brought with her? Yet even in his confusion, he felt an undeniable pull, a responsibility that went beyond decency. She had chosen his door, fallen into his arms, and asked for help. That alone bound him to her in a way that surprised him. As the clock ticked past midnight and Sophie drifted into uneasy sleep, Daniel sat quietly, realizing for the first time in years that his home no longer belonged just to him and Emily. Someone else had entered their circle, and whether it was fate, chance, or something darker, he knew nothing would be the same. Morning sunlight streamed into the kitchen, casting golden streaks across the worn wooden table. The smell of pancakes filled the air, a weekend ritual Daniel never failed to honor for Emily's sake. Sophie sat at the table, her posture tense, her fingers wrapped around a mug of tea that seemed to anchor her. Emily sat across from her, chattering happily about school projects and her favorite cartoons, unaware of the storm that hovered just beneath Sophie's pale skin. Daniel moved between stove and table, watching carefully, noticing the way Sophie's eyes darted to the door each time the wind rattled it. "You don't have to talk about anything until you're ready," he said gently. Sophie's eyes flicked to his, and for the first time since she had arrived, he saw something flicker there, trust, fragile but forming. She nodded, exhaling slowly. Minutes passed before her voice finally emerged, quiet but steady. I was with someone. He wasn't who I thought he was. He controlled everything I did, everywhere I went. Last night, I ran. But he'll come for me." The words trembled, and tears shone in her eyes. Emily reached across the table, her small hand covering Sophie's. "You can stay with us," she said with innocence only a child could carry. Sophie choked on a sob, her free hand flying to her mouth. Daniel felt a lump in his throat, his heart breaking at the raw pain in her voice. He knew she wasn't exaggerating. He could see the shadows of fear in her every movement. For reasons he couldn't fully explain, he also knew he wouldn't let her fight this alone. "Then we'll keep you safe," Daniel said firmly. Sophie nodded, tears spilling freely, but there was something else in her gaze now. A flicker of hope, faint but real, glowing through the cracks of her fear like dawn breaking after a long night. The days that followed took on a rhythm Sophie had never known, one of safety, laughter, and kindness. She helped Emily with homework, her soft voice guiding the little girl through arithmetic problems, and in return, Emily showed her how to braid doll's hair and build blanket forts. Daniel watched them sometimes from the doorway, a strange warmth filling his chest. It was almost as though Sophie had always belonged there, though he knew her presence was born of chaos and fear. Yet no amount of comfort could erase the tension that lingered in Sophie's posture, the way her head turned at every unexpected sound. One evening, the three of them sat cross-legged on the living room floor, a board game between them, laughter filling the space. For a moment, Sophie forgot. For a moment, she felt like part of something whole. But then came the sound that shattered the peace, a car screeching outside, headlights cutting harsh lines through the curtains. Sophie's body went rigid, her face draining of color. Daniel noticed instantly, his protective instincts snapping to the surface. He rose, guiding Emily gently toward her bedroom. "Stay there, sweetheart," he whispered. Then he turned back, placing himself firmly between Sophie and the door. A pounding knock shook the wood. "Sophie," a deep, furious voice bellowed. Sophie clutched Daniel's arm, her nails digging into his skin, her body trembling. Daniel's jaw tightened, his gaze hardening as he pulled her behind him. The voice outside roared again, demanding entry, threatening. Sophie's fear was palpable, but this time she wasn't alone. Daniel's hand closed around hers, his voice low but steady. "He won't touch you. Not while you're here." In that moment, she realized something profound. For years, she had been running, hiding, surviving. But here, in this small home with a man who had opened his door without hesitation, she had found not just shelter but someone willing to stand between her and the storm. The confrontation stretched into a blur of pounding fists against the door, shouted threats, and Daniel's calm but firm refusal to give in. Sophie's abuser tried to force his way inside, but Daniel's frame held the door firm. With his free hand, he dialed the police, his voice steady even as adrenaline surged through him. Sophie crouched nearby, trembling, her heart racing as memories of her past clawed at her mind. But she wasn't alone anymore. The sound of sirens split the night, growing louder until flashing lights bathed the street in red and blue. Her abuser's voice faltered, then turned to curses as officers pulled him away. Sophie clung to Daniel, tears streaming down her cheeks, her body shaking as though releasing years of pent-up terror. "You saved me," she whispered, her voice breaking. But Daniel shook his head, glancing toward Emily's bedroom door. "No," he said softly, "we saved each other." Sophie sobbed harder, not from fear but from a new, overwhelming sense of relief. Over the following days, she began to feel something unfamiliar, freedom. Emily tugged her hand, giggling, pulling her into games and routines that made her forget the years of darkness. Daniel, steady and quiet, became her anchor. Slowly, Sophie began to believe that she wasn't just a guest in this house. She was part of it. One evening, sitting together on the porch as the sun dipped behind the trees, Sophie leaned against Daniel, Emily nestled between them. For the first time in years, she let herself breathe without fear. She wasn't running anymore. She wasn't hiding. She had knocked on a stranger's door, desperate and broken, and had found not just safety but a family. And as Daniel's arm curled protectively around her shoulders, Sophie whispered into the fading light the words she never thought she'd say, "I'm home."